Well, good Friday morning, IBC family. I just wanted to take this moment to encourage you once again. I know you're getting ready to head into your weekend. And, last Sunday, we learned from Isaiah chapter 40 where we find our strength and where we find our hope to endure. And we really learned that ultimately that God does in fact see our hopelessness. He understands our fear. He understands our circumstances. And He encourages us in the midst of that fear and that hopelessness to take our focus off of the circumstances and in a sense redirect our focus onto Himself. In other words, He wants us to be distracted in a good way with Him and His attributes and His ability and His power and His goodness toward us. And we also see that we are promised that He will in fact come through for us. Well, this morning I was just reflecting and reading through our IBC reading plan. So I was reading through Psalm chapter 35. I've also made it a habit to read through a proverb every day. So I read Proverbs 26 this morning. And then I was directed by the Lord to just turn over to 2 Chronicles chapter 20. And, 2 Chronicles 20 is an incredibly instructive chapter for you and for me because it really helps us to know how to respond and in what way we ought to respond when we experience crisis in our life or troubling circumstances or things that we face that make us feel vulnerable and insecure. Just to give you a quick backdrop of what's going on here in 2 Chronicles 20, the king of Judah is King Jehoshaphat. And King Jehoshaphat did some amazing things for the kingdom of Judah. He actually caused great spiritual reform, and therefore God blessed him, and He blessed the people of Judah because of his faithfulness and his obedience. But in chapter 20, we see that there were many neighboring nations collaborating together to come up against Judah and to destroy them. And so when King Jehoshaphat was made aware of this, he sees the armies, and initially he's full of fear. And not only full of fear, but he's fearful because he feels powerless in his situation, and he doesn't know what to do. And while his emotional state may not cause a lot of reassuring for the people of Judah, we do see that his response to his crisis is really a model for you and us to follow. Look what he says here in verses 3 and 4, or just listen with me in verses 3 and 4 of 2 Chronicles chapter 20. It says, "Then Jehoshaphat was afraid, and he set his face to seek the Lord and proclaim a fast throughout all Judah. And Judah assembled to seek help from the Lord, and from all the cities of Judah they came to seek the Lord." In verse 12, Jehoshaphat is praying, and he says, "O our God, will you not execute judgment on them? For we are powerless against this great horde that is coming against us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you." Much like we see in Isaiah chapter 40, Jehoshaphat redirects his attention off of the dire circumstances, off of what's causing fear in his life and the fear in the lives of many others, and he redirects it towards God. In fact, he says he set his face toward God. He set his face to seek God. He says, "Our eyes are on you." And ultimately, what we see what that looks like is really, he directs the people of Judah into a worship service. He directs them through prayer. He directs them to worship. And we see that God, in fact, does respond. In fact, we see that ultimately He responds so well that Judah does not even have to lift a finger against their enemies. In fact, it's interesting when you read in verse 22, it says this, "And when they began to sing and praise, the Lord set an ambush against the men of Ammon and Moab and Mount Seir, and they were all eventually routed or defeated." In fact, in verse 24, it says, "When Judah came to the watchtower of the wilderness, they looked toward the horde, and behold, there were dead bodies lying everywhere. None had escaped." I think it's interesting to note that the timing in which God delivered, the timing in which God came through, was when they began to worship. when they sought the Lord in worship and in prayer. You know, much like King Jehoshaphat, you might be experiencing circumstances in your life that induce fear. And no doubt you might, in your circumstances or in your situation, feel a certain degree of hopelessness and powerlessness, and you might even feel like you don't have any clue as to what you ought to do. But I believe we can also follow the example of Jehoshaphat and the whole kingdom of Judah, in that when they were in this very difficult, scary situation, the response was very appropriate for us to follow today. And that is, they sought the Lord, they set their face to seek God, they worshiped God, and they prayed to God, and God delivered. In fact, they're able to know without any doubt, as Jehoshaphat says in verse 9, he says, if disaster comes upon us, the sword, judgment, or pestilence, or famine, we will stand before this house and before you and cry out to you in our affliction, and you will hear and you will save. You know, this resonates well with what David writes in Psalm 121 when he says, I lift my eyes up to the hills. Where does my help come from? He goes on to say, my help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. So IBC family, I just want to encourage you as you enter into your weekend. Perhaps some of you are experiencing some sort of anxiousness, fear, maybe because of what's going on in our world today, maybe because there's something hard, maybe some of you have lost your job, maybe you're wondering if you are going to lose your job, you're wondering how you're going to pay the bills. There's a lot of things that you're dealing with right now, and may I encourage you in this way, much like Jehoshaphat, much like the people of Judah, your greatest need is to take your focus off of the circumstances and to put them on Christ. Focused on Christ, not the crisis. Worship God. Come to God in prayer. And I believe, as he did for the kingdom of Judah and for Jehoshaphat, he will do for you, that he will deliver you, that he will come alongside you, that he will sustain you in your hour of need. IBC, I'm praying for you. I want to just say I love you, and I look forward to gathering in worship together this Sunday at 9 a.m. sharp. God bless.